To you first on this, Aoife. A victory for Sinn Féin. What's your sense of how things have shifted in the north and the significance of this election result that puts Sinn Féin historically on top?
Yeah, it is really, really significant. It's a historic sea change. I think, what we've seen is Sinn Féin didn't gain any seats, but they have very much consolidated the seats that they have. They have a good voter base and they ran a very effective campaign. I think the bigger sea change that we've seen is the freefall of unionism in the DUP. We are seeing people who would have traditionally been DUP voters slide away from that party, and that's why we saw the rise in the Alliance Party. I think, we're seeing, this is the youngest assembly that we've ever elected. It's also the most women we've ever elected, which I think is a great thing. But what we're seeing is that notion of unionism and all that, these young people who would have traditionally been DUP voters have moved away from that. And, the DUP tried to make this an election and a campaign about the protocol. And it was very clear from all the leaders' debates and the debates during the election, and even from the UUP, Doug Beattie saying when they came to the doors, it was not the protocol people wanted to talk about. There is a cost of living crisis. The health service in the north is on its knees. There is £3 million waiting in a bank account for Northern Ireland to be spent, which cannot be spent without an executive. Those are the things that the people in Northern Ireland want sorted out.
We heard there from Michelle ONeill, Matt Carthy. She is ready to form an executive immediately, but she has a major task ahead. The Secretary of State, Brandon Lewis, will now be meeting with all parties in this, but it's very uncertain as to where it'll go.
Well, and in real terms, according to Jeffrey Donaldson, Michelle ONeill has no task at all, because what he is demanding in order to restore the executive is outside of the control of the executive. It's outside of the control of the entire island of Ireland, and arguably outside of the control of even the British and Irish governments together, because it's down to a negotiation between Britain and the European Union. Now, of course, there's a sense and a fear that the protocol is a guise, that this is about unionism not being willing to work alongside a nationalist First Minister, and only time will tell whether there's a basis in that.
Do you think that is the issue?
I would have my suspicions. I have to be quite honest and frank about it, because everybody knows, the executive, even if the entire 90 members of the Assembly agreed with the DUP's position on the protocol, and by the way, a majority of them, and a large majority, don't. But even if they did, they wouldn't be able to change it unilaterally.
Well, let's go to Sam McBride on that. On the DUP stance on this, will they accept? Are they accepting the outcome of this election? And are they going to contend with second place here?
It's fairly extraordinary that you even have to ask that question, and yet the reason that you're asking that question is because Jeffrey Donaldson did not clarify this during the campaign. He quite deliberately made this a question which was in people's minds. That was disastrous for his party. It drove voters to Sinn Féin. It really undermined the basic principles of any democratic outcome, that you have to accept it, whether you win or whether you lose. But we've had some more clarity from the DUP on that since the result. One of their ministers has said today quite clearly that yes, they will serve with Michelle ONeill as First Minister. So that seems to be off the table. That's a fairly easy thing to take off the table, because it's purely symbolic. What Sinn Féin has achieved here is extraordinary. It's hugely significant in really symbolic terms, as has been said by Aoife there. But it really is about rubbing the deputy out in front of the title that was there for Michelle ONeill. It's purely symbolic. It doesn't give her any extra powers. That's the easy thing for the DUP to accept. The more difficult thing is the protocol. And as Matt Carthy says, that's outside the control of anybody in Northern Ireland. So that's not looking like we're going to have a government for a considerable period.
Yeah, I mean, does this really mean weeks of a stalemate here? What can these negotiations or talks with the British Secretary of State, Brandon Lewis, meeting the parties, will that do any good at all? It's just window dressing?
I don't think there's any prospect of that going anywhere. I think there is a temptation that some people in the DUP feel about leaving this for several months. And if the protocol stays as it is, if the Irish Sea border stays as it is, really going back to the electorate and seeing if actually unionists will rally behind them. That's a massively risky strategy. But one significant element of this is that while, as Aoife said, there are unionist voters who have left unionism, who have gone to Alliance, who have gone to the centrist parties, that has also happened from nationalist parties. They've lost voters to to the centre ground. But there was a big shift here, a more significant shift within Unionism to the hardline fringe of Jim Allister, to the most anti-protocol party that there is. He got 66,000 votes. It didn't get him any extra seats in the Assembly, but he is now a significant force on the right of Unionism. Unionism is both shrinking in this election, but it's also hardening its position. And that makes it hard for Sir Jeffrey Donaldson to compromise, even if that's what he wanted to do.
On this one, Jim, the whole formation of the North, you say, was designed to stay under Unionist control. And this has changed everything. Yet we are at stalemate once again.
Yeah, I think it is a historic event, and I think we need to recognise that. The fact that a nationalist party is the largest party in Northern Ireland is something that James Craig would never envisaged when he set up Northern Ireland in 1922. So, I congratulate Michelle ONeill and her colleagues. It's a significant achievement. It's also historic because of the performance of the Alliance Party. And the Alliance Party went from 8 seats to 17 seats. And what it shows also, something that James Craig or even Michael Collins at the time wouldn't have envisaged, is that many people in Northern Ireland no longer view themselves as orange or green, and that is growing, and I think that's a good thing that is growing. But listen, unfortunately, there's a touch of Groundhog Day here. We've had 3 Assembly elections over the past 6 years, and during those 6 years we've only had an executive sitting for 2 years and 8 months. So we cannot allow this to happen again. The people of Northern Ireland went out last Friday, they voted, they did their part of the bargain, and they're entitled to get an executive as a result of the votes they cast. The same in any jurisdiction. If we had an election here and people didn't like the result and we didn't try to form a government, we'd be criticised. So I think really Jeffrey Donaldson and the DUP need to recognise that they're playing a dangerous game by placing their trust in Boris Johnson. They tried that already and he let them down. The likelihood is he's going to let them down again. And the problem with this issue is in British politics, Brexit is not so much an event as a state of mind, and it seems to suit members of the British Tory party to keep it as a live issue on the agenda, fights with the EU. And that's not serving the interests of Ireland.
Aoife, how does this dangerous game then potentially play out?
I cannot overstate enough how deeply unpopular the last Stormont stalemate was. The people on the doors of Northern Ireland were absolutely furious. I cannot see how it's going to get any better when there is a cost of living crisis and they see MLAs who are not at work but getting paid their very good wage when they're not going to work. Jeffrey Donaldson is playing a very risky game here, and if it does go the 24 weeks and we have another election, the DUP will pay the price at the doors even worse than they did on Friday, because the people of Northern Ireland really want Stormont back together.